Hey there, welcome to a special bonus episode of Talking Cars. I'm Keith Barry.
And I'm Chris Harto.
And Chris, you're here because you are our expert around EVs and tax policy and things like that, right? What's your official job title?
Sure. I'm a senior policy analyst here in our DC office of Consumer Reports. And really what I do is help advocate for consumer-friendly, clean transportation policies, as well as help decipher what's going on in Washington and translate that for consumers.
And you have been my guide in deciphering these things because it is written in subpart C in section 4 or whatever. We need to say this. We're going to try and help walk our viewers, listeners, readers through these changes. We're not giving you tax advice. Talk to an accountant if you have questions, but we are going to try and help you make smart choices about buying an EV. So, Chris, what's going on here? I know that there used to be a $7,500 tax credit, but it only applied to a certain number of vehicles. There was like a 200,000 vehicle cap, and that's why you couldn't get a tax credit on an electric GM car or a Tesla. But then with the Inflation Reduction Act, they removed the cap, but then they put other things in place. So what are some of these changes? I know it has to do with the buyer's income and some things about the cars themselves, right?
Yeah, they made a number of big changes to the tax credit, many of which went into effect January 1st. Some of those big changes, the biggest one you mentioned is removing that cap. So before any automaker, once they built 200,000 EVs, they no longer were eligible for any tax credits. So that really punished early movers, automakers that were building popular EVs, and benefited automakers who were building kind of lower volume EVs. But that's just
you could get it on a Fiat 500e, but you couldn't get it on a Tesla.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So when they removed that cap, they put in some additional restrictions to try and limit the tax credit. Some of the big ones there is they put income caps on. So now the tax credit, you're only eligible for if your income is up to $150,000 for an individual or up to $300,000 for a family filing jointly. Another big one is they put in restrictions on the price of the vehicle. So those restrictions are up to $55,000 for an electric car and up to $80,000 for an electric SUV or pickup truck or van.
Yeah. So then the other big difference, the other big change has to do with where these vehicles are made. And the one that most people are talking about is the final assembly requirement that the car has to be made in North America for it to qualify.
Yeah. So the other major requirements that were put on these tax credits is that the vehicle had to be assembled here in the United States, that the battery itself had to be manufactured either in the United States or the rest of North America. You get half the credit for building the battery here in North America. And then the other half of the tax credit is tied to where the key critical minerals, things like lithium, cobalt, nickel, some of these minerals that go into the battery, where they're produced. And those can be produced in any country that we have a free trade agreement with.
So then we have another rule there on top of all this called the Foreign Entities of Concern rule. And that means that countries that the U.S. has deemed a foreign entity of concern, and that includes right now Russia and China, that a car that gets battery minerals from those countries would not get any tax credit. But that's going to be in 2024, right?
Yeah, that's correct. That doesn't go into effect until 2024. And yes, any battery material that comes from a foreign entity of concern, which is a list that I believe is kept by the State Department. It's not just countries, it's companies, it's terrorist organizations, it's any group, company, country that is deemed a risk to U.S. national security is banned from eligibility.
Yeah, but that's not until 2024. So let's walk through it. Someone's going to be buying an EV today. It's February and it's not March yet. There aren't any rules about the critical minerals and battery components, and there aren't any issues about the foreign entities of concern. So they need to check. They need to check their income. Are they income eligible? They need to check if the car is made in North America, if its final assembly is in North America, and they can find that on the window sticker of the car itself. They need to check the price of the car, and that's if it's under 55 grand for a sedan or a wagon or a crossover, and under 80 grand for an SUV or a truck or a van. And that's MSRP. That's not like a dealer. They can't like discount the price of the dealer. It's the window sticker price, right?
Yeah, that's correct. It's the price on the window sticker with all the installed options there.
So they buy the car, and then when they do their taxes at the end of the year, they can get a $7,500 credit on it. But starting in March, as soon as these new rules come out, and I've been in contact with a lot of different automakers, and none of them are saying which way they're assuming things will go for their cars. There's a chance you could go and buy a car that in February qualified for $7,500, and then it turns out that because the battery components, too much of the battery components come from China or come from anywhere outside of North America or a place where there's no free trade agreement, that you'd only get a half credit, right?
That's correct. Yeah. So for many of the vehicles that currently qualify for the full credit that are built in North America, many of them will have the tax credit cut in half to $3,750 after the Treasury releases their guidance, which they expect to come in towards the end of March.
All of these things are like really, really dynamic. You might not know a car that qualifies today might not qualify tomorrow. Is there like going to be some and might not qualify in 2024? So like what's going on? I mean, I hear car manufacturers are like, they're trying to figure out where they're, I know Hyundai and Kia are talking about building more cars in the United States. Mm-hmm. Volkswagen switched the production of their ID4 to Tennessee from Europe. So they would get, their cars would be, the ID4 would be eligible. There must be a lot that's going on behind the scenes, right?
Yeah, there's, every automaker is jockeying for position, trying to figure out how to maximize this tax credit, take advantage of it to the maximum possibility. You've seen price cuts by a number of automakers to get their vehicles down under the price limits.
Suddenly Tesla qualifies. Yeah,
Tesla made big price cuts. That's leading to other automakers making price cuts. I saw. Ford just cut the price of the Mach-E a little bit to qualify for the tax credit. So there's a lot of dynamics both on the pricing side.
So why don't we just have a tax credit that is on EVs? How come I have to worry about if I'm going out and buying an EV? Why do I have to worry about how much I make, the approach angle of the car that I'm buying? Like what is the point here? What happened?
Yeah,
why is it like this?
Yeah, it definitely adds a lot of, some could argue unnecessary complexity to the whole situation. I think the price caps and income caps were well intentioned. I don't think a lot of the EVs being built by automakers, at least in the past couple of years, have been pretty high end luxury cars, and I think there's an argument to be made that the taxpayers shouldn't be subsidizing, $100,000 plus sports cars for rich people. That's a pretty safe argument. Yeah. The other factor, with the battery minerals and the battery manufacturing component, that adds a ton of complexity to the tax credit, and I think is going to add some confusion for consumers. But again, the intention behind that is really to, instead of just importing everything, to really build up American supply chains around these vehicles. If these vehicles are going to be, a big part of the future of transportation, politicians in Washington wanted to make sure that, as many of those vehicles as possible and as much of that supply chain as possible was built here in the United States instead of overseas.
I see. There's sort of there's a worthy goal behind all of these, but for someone who's just trying to buy a car, there is another option, all right? There's leasing, and there's I've been told not to call it a leasing loophole, but I've been told by the Treasury Department that it is a longstanding interpretation of commercial tax law. That it's not a loophole, but what's going on here? If you lease a car, all these rules just suddenly go away, kind of.
Yeah, so that's correct. In a way, yes. So we've been talking throughout this podcast about the consumer tax credit, and that's the one that has all of these restrictions on it.
If I'm going to buy a car, I'm an individual. I'm going to a dealership. I'm buying a car, and I'm going to drive it. It's my personal vehicle. Okay.
Yeah. There is a separate tax credit that was passed in the Inflation Reduction Act that is for commercial vehicles.
If I'm a contractor or I'm buying a Ford Lightning for my workplace.
Yeah, if you're buying a Ford Lightning as a work truck. If an Amazon is buying all these electric delivery trucks, those will qualify for the commercial tax credit. So the IRS has long defined a lease as a commercial vehicle ownership, and they will be eligible for the tax credit, the commercial tax credit, which they could potentially pass along and hopefully pass along to consumers who lease that vehicle.
So to be clear, the commercial tax credit doesn't have all these restrictions about where a car is made or the buyer's income or anything like that, right? So what would happen is I'd lease a car, and then the dealership might take the full $7,500 off the price of the vehicle that the lease is based on, right?
Yeah, that's correct. And each automaker is sort of, and their financing units are trying, kind of figuring out exactly how that will be implemented. But, in some cases, they might just give you a check for $7,500 at the time that you lease the vehicle. Or they may use that $7,500 to reduce the monthly payment throughout that lease. There's different ways it may be implemented.
Yeah, we're waiting to see how that comes out in practice. So far, only a couple of companies. I know Lucid has talked about they're going to take it off the price of the Air EV. And that's a really expensive car that's not made in America, that tends to be bought by wealthier buyers. So that's a car that's not going to get the individual tax credit. But from our end, the advice that we give is if you're leasing an EV, well, first of all, if you're buying an EV and you don't qualify or the car doesn't qualify for the tax credit, consider a lease. And then when you're leasing, make sure you get an itemized bill of sale for the lease, and itemized documents that show exactly where that $7,500 was accounted for, because they don't have to give it to you. They can.
That's correct. There's no requirement for them to pass it along. If you don't know about it, you don't ask about it. And, they could theoretically just pocket it.
Yeah. So one last piece, there is also a used car tax credit, which is new.
Yeah, that's correct. It's up to $4,000 or 30% of the value of the vehicle. The vehicle, there's a number of restrictions on this one as well. The big one is the price. So the vehicle has to be priced under $25,000. You also have to purchase the vehicle from a dealer. You can't just go buy an EV off of Craigslist and or Facebook Marketplace and claim the tax credit. The income limits are also lower for the used vehicle tax credit. So instead of $150,000 for an individual, it's only $75,000 for an individual, or $150,000 for a family filing jointly.
There are a couple other things too. It's 30%. It's not necessarily 4,000. It's also
that's correct. If the vehicle is priced lower, it's only up to 30% of the price of the vehicle. So you can't go buy a $5,000 used EV for essentially almost free.
Yeah. And also the vehicle has to be at least 2 years old. So you can't buy it from yourself. And it can't have been sold more than once. So this is really interesting. So if you have a car that's a 2-owner Nissan Leaf versus used and it meets all the other requirements, it doesn't qualify. But if you have a 1-owner Nissan Leaf, it qualifies. So it's going to do some weird things to the used car market, used EV market, at least, I think.
Yeah, there's definitely going to be some interesting effects.
So bottom line, if you're looking for a car today, if you're looking for an EV today and it looks like it qualified, and don't ask your dealer. I mean, ask your dealer, but talk to an accountant. Don't ask us. Talk to an accountant. Talk to a tax professional to find out. Don't trust. I'm not saying the dealer would lie to you. No, I'm just saying that this is something which is so dynamic that you need someone who really is on top of the whole situation. So let's say your accountant says, "Hey, the car qualifies. Should you go out and buy it today?"
Yeah, if a vehicle qualifies, made in America, qualifies for the tax credit, you can find it. Dealers aren't marking it up by a bunch of money. Definitely go buy it today.
Yeah, because it might not qualify tomorrow.
That's true.
Yeah. So another reminder, though, is that there's no such thing as a good deal and a bad car. So don't rush out and buy a car that isn't CR recommended. We have a list of our CR recommended EVs at cr.org. Don't buy one of those ones on the bottom of the list just to save some money. And also, if you go to CR's EV Incentive Finder, which is cr.org/EV savings, you can find out what else you might be able to save on. So you can get a discount in installing a charger. You can get a discount on your electric rate. You can get a discount from your power company. Some states have rates. I know, in Connecticut, it's $2,000 from some cars. Massachusetts is $3,500 on top of that. So you can save a lot of money on an EV if you know who to ask. So start by asking Consumer Reports. So as all these things change, Chris, I'm going to keep going to you. And I think we might have to do a follow-up to this podcast, but as things change. But thanks so much for joining. Head over to cr.org and find out more. And we'll be updating our list of vehicles that qualify. And thanks for joining us on this very special bonus episode.